Okay, folks, welcome to U2, the second installment of our Quarantine School, QS2, Quarantine School Week 2. Again, we're going to be talking about complexity. What? Um, and how it might help us, survive the next quarantine apocalypse or the next challenge that we have in our society. We're going to be seeing more changes as time goes forward. That's the one thing that is a guarantee is that you guys are going to see probably multiple disease outbreaks like this as our global culture has become increasingly complex. And you're likely to see additional economic turns. In your own lifetime, we have had two major recessions, and this one may end up being a depression. We can't really tell until about 5 to 10 years in. But we are likely to see quite a bit of change in your lifetimes. And it's not always good change. It's not always bad change. It's usually a mix of the two. So, again, this unit is about us understanding the depth of complexity so that we may adapt to it. Survive, adapt, reproduce. So we'll start by talking about, even though some of us really like to believe that the world is a simple place with this judgmental line segment, only a real fool would deny that we clearly live in a complex, I would say hyper complex world. Many things can be seen as simple. For instance, what you see here is the forecast for the next 7 days in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Looks pretty simple. You don't have to think about anything like the winds and how the winds are going to come in and what altitudes the winds are going to come in, when the cloud's going to come over. This is good enough for your daily life and preparing what to wear if you've got a soccer game. And this is good enough for what you need most of the time. However, if your pilot is, let's say you're on a plane, you don't want your pilot to be thinking about only that. You want them to be thinking about the complexity of her flight path. There's many, many, many factors. And since you're working in 4 dimensions, height, width, depth, and of course time, as you move from, let's say, Albuquerque to New York City, you want your pilot to really understand the weather in front of her much better than you would looking at the forecast for Albuquerque. So, again, you want to understand the complexity of your situation, but you can, like anything else, apply too much complexity to a simple situation. And that's the kind of position that we're in right now. We don't know whether we should add additional complexity or whether we should be more simple. This is a brand new time, and if you haven't realized we need to rethink things, then I ask you to rethink you're not rethinking thinking things. Uh, it's a really complicated world that we live in, and the more we can think about our thinking, the more we can understand how we are emotional, social, psychological, and physical beings, and understand what that means for ourselves and everybody else, the better we will all be off. For instance, if you are faced with a tornado, which, because we live in Albuquerque, we don't have to deal with, you probably would like to avoid something like this. If you were in Oklahoma, somewhere in Kansas, Missouri, um, Iowa, any place that has a lot of tornadoes, you want to stay the heck away from these. Well, how do people stay away from these or know to go to underground shelters? How do you avoid this kind of weather? How do people predict things to avoid this kind of weather? Well, there are a group of people called meteorologists, and their job is to study the weather. But it's not just studying the weather in Albuquerque. What you and I see on the news, or what you and I hear when we call 821 1111 with the Albuquerque Journal, is we get a basic idea of what's going to happen. But a meteorologist doesn't just pull these numbers out of thin air. They use something called stochastic probabilistic mathematics. It's a fancy way of saying that they use data from the past and data from the future. So let's say there's some weather going on in Los Angeles and there's something else happening in Tacoma, Washington, and there's something else happening in Tucson, Arizona. There's a way that they can apply all of these numbers and all of these variables to particular patterns. Um, Rather, and this is not just a weatherman, guys. This is an actual meteorologist, somebody who went to school to understand this mathematics, to use computers to model everything else. So you can see there's a lot of stuff going on here. Now, if I am giving a prediction for Albuquerque, New Mexico, I'm probably not going to look down here to the southern half of the globe. I probably don't need to understand too much about the equatorial low and the doldrums down here. But I might want to know a little bit more about the polar fronts, subtropical highs, and the horse latitudes, the westerlies, all these fancy words that they have, and knowing how these convection currents, how these hots and colds move together to form the weather and the Coriolis effect. There's all these things. So these meteorologists have to know the region they're studying and a little bit northwest, south, and east. But there's a level of understanding that goes above that called climatology. And these people study the climate for the entire planet over deep time. As you see in red here, the climate is the overall average over time, and the weather is the overall variation in the short term. And so these folks look at the climate, the overall trend of how all of this works over time and over deep time. We're talking at least 25 years or more, and there's all sorts of ways they do that. Just a reminder, anything with this blue, this blue square around it, you guys remember that's a linkable picture. Now, this is all to say that you don't want your local weather person pretending that they do this on the right. These are climate models coming from the Santa Fe Institute. These are talking about all the dynamics of the heat and energy and water and carbon flows, all these things that are happening to truly understand. Now, why do people do this? Yeah, because they're freaking nerds. No, they're doing this because if you can do a better job of predicting future trends than the people you're competing with, if you can be more accurate 51% of the time where they're accurate only 49% of the time, you are going to get the job and you are going to be considered a genius. So you don't have to be these amazing Einstein people. You just have to be right more often than you are wrong. And instantly people start to come to you. People start to want to be around you. People want to listen to what you have to say. Although you can also go so far, and you're so right so much of the time, that people don't like hearing what you have to say either. Some people, 2020 years ago, were killed for such things. So what's your point, Mr. Sims? You're meandering, you're moving all around the place, jumping from idea to idea. Well, the one thing we are sure about in this world is that COVID-19 is clearly, absolutely clearly a game changer for this planet and for us as individuals. It has forced us to realize that we live in a series of complex systems that are all interconnected and interactive, with many people, businesses, and governmental services all cooperating, with many different people taking, frankly, many different approaches to the problem. And while these complex systems that do this are not unique to humans, we should understand that ours is unique to us. We have harnessed about 70%, maybe 60 to 70% of the Earth's resources of energy and materials. We are a geological force, folks. 2 million years from now, if there's another intelligent species, there will be chemical evidence in the rocks that we existed. That's how powerful we are. Now, again, COVID-19 coronavirus is clearly a game changer because it forces us to realize the things we thought were simple are actually incredibly complex. This tiny little virus, it has forced us to complexify simple things like going to the store, going to school, going to work, getting our taxes done, visiting our friends and family, and more. Almost everything many of us do or did with our lives changes when we realize the true complexity of the lives we live. And those of you willing to put in the work and the time and the thoughtfulness to understand this are going to survive better, are going to reproduce better, and you are going to do this because you will be able to adapt better. Now, all of that is really upsetting to some of these people. All of this realization of complexity. And all these people want, if you've looked at the news, again, you can see the links to these different articles if there's blue around them. These people want the world to be simpler. They want things to go back to the way they were. And there's a great cost to doing so, but that's what they want. They are upset by complexity. Yes, they have individual complaints about wanting to go back to work or about the government telling them what to do, and it causes people to act very, very, very irrationally, carrying weapons, wearing I am not even sure what this is. I think this is I think this over here might actually be a World War II or maybe a Vietnam era flight jacket, gas mask. Not of, I don't understand. Oh, wait, I do. It's because they want the world to be simple. They're tired of this additional complexity. It's scary, and I understand their fear, and it is in some ways rational. Yet, there are people who are feeling that same kind of fear and anxiety and dread because they're actually facing these problems. Doctors and nurses not getting to go into, if they're wearing their scrubs, they're not getting into grocery stores. They're not getting into the places where they need to survive because they're wearing their scrubs or they're wearing their name badges for the hospitals that they work in. Their unemployment, 22 million people have now gone on unemployment in the United States of America. The system was not designed for those numbers. People who are having to just hustle to get along, people who were, artists and musicians, they had to quit or they were not hired. Their bars were closed and they had to go hustle. And so they're like literally the people that are taking the coronavirus bodies out of the hospitals and stacking them up like cordwood into refrigerated trailers, the same kind of trailers that bring your produce, that bring your lettuce and tomatoes from Florida or Texas, are now being used to house human bodies. This is a complex time. These people want simplicity too. It's clearly something that's very overwhelming for most of us. As somebody who struggles with mental health himself, this has in some ways been really nice because I've not been around people, but it's also been really, really not nice because I haven't been around people. It's a mess. And what we have to do is try to make sense of it. Okay, let's be honest. It really hasn't been a problem for all of us. The meme makers have found this to be an amazingly hilarious time, and I have to admit, it has been a moment of refuge for me to see some of these memes, especially the "I am going to Costco" one, which I send to my wife every time I go out, which has been maybe twice, maybe three times in the last few weeks. Now, I'm not asking you guys to start thinking about complexity as a whole. I mean, what you're seeing here is pretty overwhelming. This is actually a map of the complexity sciences. You don't worry, no quiz on this. Um, but we do have to understand the proper level of complexity we need to start operating in, which means we have to rethink our thinking. So, let's rethink about the systems that we're in. Your job for you two for the second week of coronavirus school is to answer these two questions. Number one, there are many systems that need to function in order to make our lives possible, starting with the systems within your body, the cardiovascular system, nervous system, etc., and ending with a global ecosystem, ecological or life-based systems. List in ascending order as many systems as you possibly can, with a minimum of 15. Number two, pick 7 of these 15 systems from your list. Write 2 paragraphs for each system you choose as follows. A, for paragraph 1. Talk about what would happen to society if this system suddenly stopped working. And B, paragraph 2, or more if you want. Talk about your detailed plan for if and when this system stops working. Now, here's my example for number 1. I have listed 5 here. I'm thinking of the smallest thing. My own digestive system is something that I kind of need to, make my life possible. The system within my family, me and my wife, my mom and dad, her mom, her brother and sister, my neighbors, that system I have to start thinking about. The school system I need educated people, otherwise people screw up my prescriptions, etc. And at the largest, of course, the global climate, the global economy, and the global communication system. Now, notice that there's only 5 there. I'm asking you to come up with 15. If you want to steal these 5 that I created, great. Go ahead. No worries. You still need to come up with 10 more. So I'm just needing a list of 15 total for number 1. My example for number 2, remember you're supposed to pick 7 of these. Out of that 15 that you come up with, you need to pick 7 of those and write 2 paragraphs for each system. So if you look below in white, you'll notice number 1 of 7, I picked the school system. Number 2 of 7, I picked the New Mexico state government. Number 3, okay, I've got to have a total of 7. So what do? Well, I've already given you an example of what I'm expecting. Chances are, folks, and looking at your papers from last week, those of you that have turned it in, if you don't use enough words, if the words in your answer aren't more than the question itself, it's definitely not long enough, folks. If it's not 3 times as long, it's not long enough. So if the question has 30 words, you might want to get 90 in there. You guys are going to high school next year, whether it's virtual or physical, and the expectations are going up. So it might be time to keep your brain going and to get it ready to do this digitally. So here's my answer for paragraph 1. Talk about what would happen to a society if the system suddenly stopped working. So here's what I wrote. We already saw what might happen if our school system collapsed. In the month we had off of school, the families who have had the time and money to educate their children for empowerment would either pay for tutors or educate their kids themselves. In that month, the kids with that privilege didn't fall behind a bit. In fact, those youth kept moving forward, learning how to control their lives and hold control over the lives of others. They will continue to use this privileged wealth of learning resources throughout both school and life. If anything, this break did not break those with time and money in the least. In contrast, many families used this break to educate their children for survival. Without the resources of extra time and money, many adults had to work. Otherwise, they would lose their homes and or their family would go hungry. The additional unexpected and unplanned stress, energy, time, and money of having to feed and care for youth was overwhelming for many. This broke the routines these families had established. Some kids didn't get to eat regularly. Some people had to go on the hustle to make ends meet. This put everyone in the family into survival mode. Being in that state of mind stresses you out and can lead to bigger problems in the long run. Again, answering the question, talk about what would happen to society if this system suddenly stopped working. Here's my paragraph 2, still talking about the school system. Talk about your detailed plan for if and when the system stops working. Here's my answer. Again, I have some idea what would happen in my own family. My niece and nephew's expensive private school shut down for the rest of the year. No refund. Our family couldn't absorb that cost and not lose our homes. We wouldn't go hungry. In fact, it led to the kids hanging out with their grandparents even more. This reinforces my belief that those who already have the educational privilege and position in society would continue their march towards empowerment for themselves and their kids. On the other side of my family, out in California, things have not been so good. My aunt and uncle, both older than my own parents, who are retired, have had to continue to work to make ends meet. They both didn't lose their jobs, but their jobs stopped paying them. So they had to quit. This meant they couldn't get unemployment for several weeks because they chose to leave in the state of California. Their great-grandkids were also home from school, just like here in Albuquerque. But all of the 14 great-grandkids were put into the great-grandparents' care. Within a week, those 70-year-old adults were exhausted and out of cash. The only thing regularly keeping all those kids fed and entertained was the school lunches and an overtaxed Wi-Fi router at home. It hasn't been good for them. So in my family, we're seeing both the extremes, survival mode on one side and continuing to empower oneself on the other. It's a complicated and complex world that we live in. So let's review what your task is, okay? Number 1, answer this. You need to come up with a minimum of 15, okay, there it is, a minimum of 15 systems that need to function in order to make our lives possible. Okay, that's the first step. The second step is that we want to pick 7 of these systems from your list of 15. Write 2 paragraphs for each system you choose as follows. Again, paragraph 1, talk about what would happen if society lost this system or it stopped working. And paragraph 2, talk about your detailed plan for if and when the system stops working. However you approach this is up to you again. It can be text, it can be video, it can be a presentation, but again, it has to be serious. I'm not talking about busy work here for you guys to be at home. This is not stupid school stuff. This is actually trying to get you to think about things that can and will someday make your lives easier and possibly even save the lives of you and your loved ones. That's a worthwhile use of your time. So I really do hope that you guys understand that. And if you don't, I hope that these lessons continue to be online and available to you throughout your school years and that you take something from them, because this is the kind of stuff that has made some people's lives less disrupted than others. If your family's life was extremely disrupted by all of this, I really do hope that you realize that the kind of thinking that we've talked about in class, survival mode stuff, is kind of important. Understanding complexity is. But, okay, wait, I'm still confused. Not a problem, guys. What I have created here, well, not here on the screen, but what I've created is on our Google Classroom, and you can go over there now to look up the presentation. I have taken an online comic about making sense of complexity. If you still don't know what I mean by complexity and about systems and about how all of that fits together, Sarah Firth, who is a researcher, I believe, in Italy, she's actually a graphic artist that works with complexity scientists to make sense of their work. I'm just going to offer you the first page. Again, I'm not making any money off of this. I'm just using Sarah Firth's stuff because it's an incredible, beautiful example of what I'm trying to do. She works as a graphic recorder who listens to people working with complex systems and like climate change, technological disruption, social inequality, conservation of food production, and urban planning. And there's so much more than that, but that's what she works with. She listens to what they have to say and she draws it into a pictorial form, into picture-based form. You can go over to Google Classroom as soon as this video ends and go look at her comic book. I'm not going to read it out loud. It wasn't written by me. I don't want somebody else's voice to be overshadowed by my own. So go over to Google Classroom now, take a look at this comic book, scroll down on the presentation. It's there. I want you guys to see what complexity is and to really expand your minds on this, because someday it very well may save all of us. Good luck as we go to you too, and I'll see you guys on the flip side.